I'm at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm with Mr. Seymour Lavine, Mr. Lavine's wife.
Testing. This is in.
This is August 25th, 2008. My name is Joe Bruckner. I'm at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm with Mr. Seymour Lavine, who has kindly agreed to participate in the Veterans History Project today and to tell us about his experiences growing up and participating in World War II and his experiences thereafter. Mr. Lavine, we really appreciate you taking your time to come down here and talk with us. Mr. Lavine's wife, Connie, is also here, and Tony Hilliard, who is in charge of the project here at the Atlanta History Center, is also with me. Mr. Lavine, would you give us your complete name and your current address, please?
Seymour Stanley Lavine. I live at 1670 Nottingham Way in Sherwood Forest. That's Atlanta, Georgia.
And what is your date of birth?
December 7th, 1912.
Okay. Would you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, where you were born, your family?
I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, but I didn't like it very well, and I left there when I was a year old and moved to New York with my parents. And lived in New York on Central Park West. Went to Columbia University, and my brother, who I will also mention in this interview, attended City College of City of New York. My father was in the manufacturing business of ladies' clothing, and I had just a wonderful, wonderful life. We lived on Central Park West, and I used to go horseback riding on the bridle paths of Central Park. And shall I continue to move you down here? At one point, my father had difficulty with trade unions in New York, and we moved the factory down to Atlanta, Georgia in 1936, where he continued manufacturing until I was ready to. I left him in order to go into the Army. Shall I continue along that?
Before you went into the Army, I see you went into the Army in 1942.
Right.
Where were you when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
It was my birthday, and I was riding around in an automobile getting ready to celebrate my birthday in Atlanta, Georgia.
Could you describe your feelings and the feelings and reaction of the people you were with and your family and the people of Atlanta when they realized what had happened at Pearl Harbor?
Well, we were all very shocked, of course, and thought those horrible Japanese, how could they do that to us? Of course, we had already gone through the situation with the Nazis in Germany and were very much concerned about that. And I didn't know where we would go from there.
Where did you go from there, you personally?
Well, both my brother and I were very U.S. oriented, of course, and we felt that we had to enlist. And I was 29, I was married, I was in business, and my brother was 27, and he was married, and we both enlisted quite early, 1942.
How did your parents and your spouses feel about that?
Well, they really thought we should wait until we were
Drafted?
Until we were drafted. But we just both decided, we sat and talked about it, and we decided to go ahead and enlist. It was very important to us.
Before we get into your military career, where did you live in Atlanta? What part of town?
I lived in the northeast section of Atlanta.
Changed a lot since then, hasn't it?
Oh, it's changed tremendously. I don't know if some for the better, some for the worse.
Well, bring us up to the time when you enlisted. Talk about your enlistment, your training, and just your experiences in the military.
Okay. Well, my brother was a very fine French scholar, and they put him in an Army Specialized Training Program, and they sent him to a special camp in Alabama to learn about military occupation. They thought they would put him into military occupation after we had won the war. And he was just about ready to go into Officer Candidate School when they needed more men over in Belgium. And they hurriedly took him and about 100 others and gave them 8 weeks infantry training, which was really nothing, and they shot them over to Belgium. They made him a squad leader in the 104th Infantry Division, and he was leading a squadron of reconnaissance patrol along a river when they spotted German armor across the river. They fired a bazooka at the German armor, which hit one tank, and then the tank fired back, hitting my brother an arm. It tore off his arm, and he didn't last a day. And he had been left behind to let the rest of his squad retreat safely, so he was the one that really was hit. Strangely enough, he didn't get his Purple Heart and his Bronze Star till 1996, when they gave a big full dress parade at Fort McPherson, and the commanding general gave his Purple Heart and his Bronze Star to his wife at that time.
Why did he not receive it earlier? Just
I have absolutely no idea.
let me hand you this document that you had shown us previously, and would you hold it up to the camera and describe what it is?
Yeah, this is the program that they gave out. At the headquarters of the Forces Command, which told about Sandy's enlistment and his history and his service record and what happened to him on the shores of Normandy in the fall of 1944.
And we will keep that on file here at the History Center.
Right.
I know you're proud of your brother.
Very much so. He was a wonderful guy, and I miss him to this day.
I'm sure you do. Would you describe your experiences when you enlisted and your training, where you went for training, what you were trained to do?
I enlisted as a VOC, which is a volunteer officer candidate, which meant that I could, if I didn't go through OCS satisfactorily, I could go back to civilian life and wait until I was drafted, or I could remain in the service, possibly as cadre at an Army installation. I decided to stay in. Strangely enough, when I came before an officer board, they asked me where Madagascar was, and I didn't recall where Madagascar was, so they put me into the infantry. I went through basic training at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and went to OCS at Fort Benning, Georgia. My eyes were not very good, and it was the beginning of the war, and they were very particular. And they said, no, we can't take you as an infantry officer because your eyes are too bad. So I had my choice of going back as cadre. I went back to Fort McClellan. They made me the plans and training sergeant of the 6th Regiment at Fort McClellan, which work I enjoyed. Among other things, they had me do was prepare different training equipment, which was sort of in my realm because I was interested in carpentry. And at one period they picked some of the larger sergeants to send after prisoners. They picked me to go up to Boston to pick up a prisoner. I went up to Boston with my sidearm on, and I stayed at a cousin of mine's in Boston. Went down to MP barracks the next morning to pick up my prisoner. And they looked around and they said, only one man? I said, why? Well, they said, this man has escaped 3 times, and we finally hold him in an alley and threatened to kill him before he gave up. So I said, well, you'll have to put up with me. So they brought this guy out. He was about 6'5", fiery, red-headed, hadn't shaved since Lord knows when, and he looked like he was ready to tear anybody apart. Well, at any rate, they handcuffed him to me. We went down to the Boston train station, and people would just shrug and steer away from me. You look so awful. Well, I got into New York, and I had to stay in New York, an overnight stay. So I was looking around for a place to leave him overnight, and I went down to Governor's Island. I was up and down New York City in the subway with him handcuffed to me, and people, of course, just having an awful aversion. And finally, I found the Armory on 69th Street, I think it was. It said they would keep him. But they had him chained to a bench overnight and only gave him crackers and soft drink to eat. So when I went to pick him up the next morning, he was fit to be tied. And I had had a wonderful night in New York, and I thought, my God, how am I going to get through this? Because I'm going to have to be overnight on the train with him to Anniston, Alabama. So handcuffed to him. I tried to keep my eyes open as best as possible. I even kept handcuffed to him when he had to go to the men's room. I didn't give him a chance to go away. And finally, we got back to Fort McClellan safely.
Well, now, was this an American soldier?
This was an American soldier that had gone AWOL.
Okay.
My life was just wonderful there. I had my own Jeep. The colonel liked me. But the adjutant general's staff came through to check on things, and I had a hutman behind the old brigade headquarters, and they saw prisoners planting flowers around this hut, which happened to be my hut. And they investigated further, and I said, this guy is going overseas. So I chose paratroop training. I went for paratroop training. I remember one very delectable part of it is at camp near Toccoa, Georgia. We had to double time 5 miles up a mountain before breakfast. And at any rate, they transferred me to the 11th Airborne in let's see, where was it? Oh, and Guadalcanal, elements of the 11th Airborne in Guadalcanal. While I was there, I looked up a friend of mine who was a company commander in the 1st Marines, Arthur Weiss, and I found that he had gotten a bullet up his rear end and was not expected to live. However, fortunately, he did live and retired as a major in the Marines. Made a landing, a drop on Bougainville, where we had really quite light skirmishes.
Now, when would this have been? Around 43?
Around into 43, yeah. There were light skirmishes. I was slightly wounded, and I was okay in about 2 weeks. And by that time, we were almost ready to leave. I might mention we were right alongside of Australian troops who were absolutely wonderful. Their equipment was not nearly equal to ours, and some of the people were as old as 50 years old, which I thought was very commendable. And incidentally, we had fought there against the 12th Japanese Army, who had been taken in the rape of Nanking. Not too long before that. We suffered 400 dead, and the Japanese 12,000. One item that really sort of startled me is we left a mountain of wonderful equipment behind, which I think they set on fire, and I could not understand it, because it was certainly most usable. From there, we went by ship.
Let me ask you a question, but
Yes.
describe your feeling when you were getting ready to have your first jump at Bougainville, or your jump at Bougainville. What was the feeling on the plane as you're getting ready to jump out?
Well, I think if I were Christian, I would have crossed myself. But I thought, you got to do it, you got to do it. And that was it. Incidentally, I was transferred about that time to the 37th Infantry Division because I was supposedly quite excellent at taking out reconnaissance patrols. They said I was very daring and I knew exactly what to do.
What would you do? Describe your
Taking
experience.
out patrols, possibly sometimes behind enemy lines, and seeing what was going on. Well, anyway,
Did you have contact with the enemy when you did that quite often?
a couple of times, yeah, which I will describe further on.
Okay.
From there, we went by ship to Armory, New Guinea, and there, among other things, I led a quartermaster party, 30 miles into the interior, to a group that really needed food and water. And we had a slight skirmish there, and we killed a couple of Japs, but nobody in our party was killed. Also, one very interesting item, we used to feed breakfast, get fed breakfast very early in the morning while it was still dark, so the enemy couldn't see us. And a couple of guys behind us waiting in the chow room turned around, and there was a Japanese soldier in the chow room, in the chow line, trying to get some food. So then we went by ship to Hollandia, also in New Guinea, Incidentally, New Guinea was one of the wildest, most unsettled parts of the world at that time. And I took a patrol out, a 12-man patrol, and there was something wrong with the overlay on our map, and we got lost. And we wandered around for almost 2 weeks. The interesting part of it is we hit a colony of cannibals. But of course we had 12 armed men, and they could do nothing to us. So they did feed us, and I assume what we ate was not human flesh. And that we also hit one other tribe that was a very friendly one. I remember, among other things, that it was so humid there that our fatigues would just literally rot off. Then we joined a task force to Luzon in the Philippines. And at one point I saw a kamikaze plane, Japanese plane, come right over our ship, so close that I could see the pilot very plainly. And he hit the stern of a baby aircraft carrier just several hundred yards away from us and exploded. Also, at this point, they brought mail on the ship. I don't know where they got it. And I received the news of my brother's death at that time, which of course was horrible. And everybody was nice to me when they learned about it. Then we hit Lingayen Gulf, which is on the northwestern point in Luzon in the Philippines. And we fought our way through 2 cities or villages whose name I do not remember, and Clark Field, which had been the American field before we were overcome there. And I remember at one point there was a very deep chasm and the river below, and the bridge had been blown out, and they built a temporary bridge, and there were boards about, I think, 12 or 18 inches, which we crossed on with our packs, and I don't know how we made it, but it was quite an experience. On another very worthwhile experience, shall we say, on the way, we hit a brewery that the Japs had just left, and the beer was cold, and I made a hole in the vat and put my helmet out and got beer, and it was the first cold beer I'd had in a year or more, and it was just so delightful.
That must have been a highlight of that week.
Oh, I'm telling you, that was a highlight. That's right. We were the first outfit to Manila. That is the 37th Infantry Division, alongside of the 1st Cavalry Division. The 1st Cavalry Division came in on armored vehicles and trucks, and we walked. One of the important things that we did was relieving about 1,400 civilian and Army prisoners from Bilbid prison, who were in very, very bad shape.
What was their reaction when you...
Oh, they just were glad to see us. Of course, we immediately took care of them, shared food with them, and saw that they got the proper attention. One of the important points in Manila was that we came up against the larger amount of Japs in Manila were holed up in government buildings, which had formerly been a Spanish fort, and the walls were up to 25 feet thick, and we just couldn't get in there. And we were firing directly into the building with 155 mil howitzers with very little effect. And during the night, the Japs would come at us with bonsai attacks, yelling, and we're going to kill you, and they had swords and Lord knows what. But I think we had a few casualties, but not much. They had more casualties than we did. We finally overcame them with flamethrowers, and we killed most of them, and a few of them were left to retire. Another bad point was being held down by sniper fire in the Melanican Palace Gardens. I was held a day and a night. We couldn't move from my foxhole, or else I would have been hit by a sniper. One of the wonderful things in Manila, I made friends with a French family that had been left behind there. They couldn't get out, and they were just very lovely people. They lived right behind MacArthur's home, and I brought them food and things they needed. And when PX came through, I would bring PX supplies to the women, and I would come back very often. And I remember coming back there at different times, and I'd come in with my combat uniform, and they'd have parties with generals and colonels and Lord knows what, and none of them had been in combat, and they would interrogate me completely. Another bright spot there was a white Russian countess who had been incarcerated there, and I took her out dancing.
Really?
It was very pleasant, very pleasant. One of the worst things, I guess you might call it worst thing that happened around Manila was when I took out a squad of Americans and a platoon of Filipino scouts, and we had a company-sized group of Japanese. The Filipinos immediately took off and left us to face the Japs. I ordered my men to retreat, which we did. I grabbed a BAR from my BAR man and kept firing until I ran out of ammunition. And then fortunately, we all got back safely. We had 2 very slight wounds.
How did you get away from them? I mean, were you just able to
By
retreat?
running until we hit American lines, and they didn't follow us, of course, over the American lines. And I later got the Silver Star for that.
Congratulations.
From there, we went to Baguio, which is up in the mountains, the summer capital of the Philippines, you might say. And I remember being on top of a mountain, looking way down into a valley, and you could see Japanese troops parading and running around down in the valley. And our planes would drop bombs on them, and it was almost like watching a circus. One plane coming back from a bomb run, we looked up and we saw that there was a bomb hung from the bomb bay door. And we all dashed to our foxholes, of course, and got close to the ground, which is what every infantryman did when there was any bombing at all of any kind. You got just as close to Mother Earth as possible. And the bomb, fortunately, didn't go off, but it landed on the foxhole next to me and crushed in the chest of a corporal that was right next to me. Next, we went into Beledi Pass, which was a gateway to the Cagayan Valley in northern Luzon, where we faced 50,000 Japs under General Yamashita. We were joined at that time by the 11th Airborne. A very good friend of mine, a sergeant, was killed by a sniper just a few yards from me, which was horrible. The Japs finally surrendered, and the war was over for us. So we went back into the body of Luzon, into special camps. And one thing that I did do that was interesting, I went up on a Popper Cub and dropped surrender leaflets over on the Japs that had not given up as yet.
How did they respond to those? Because I know the Japanese had a reputation for not surrendering. Did
Right.
a number of them surrender? Or?
They fired at us, but they didn't hit us, of course.
I just want to switch this over now. So we're changing tape.
Need some water? Okay.
Did you want to take a drink of water?
Yeah, good idea.
Okay, we're good.
Ready? Okay. Another interesting little item. We had a shower back in the woods. The shower was a bamboo pole stuck into a hill where there was a stream coming out. And we get underneath the shower from the bamboo pole. And I went there. I had picked up a 45 hog leg, which is a very large Colt revolver, which I kept and used during a great part of the war. And I went in there to wash, and lo and behold, I was a Japanese soldier who had decided to take a shower too. And fortunately, I killed him before he could get to me. Then we were waiting on Luzon, waiting to be sent to Japan. And fortunately, I could jeep into Manila to my French friends. I would come in with a bunch of Japanese sabers and all sorts of stuff, which made me very popular. And then came the atom bomb, which told us that we could go home. So early in '46, I was on my way home on a ship over the stormy North China Sea, and everybody was seasick in the cabin that I shared with 5 or 6 other men, except myself. And the food was just wonderful. And I came in with a tray of delectable food, and everybody turned away from me with a groan. Finally hit San Francisco, and the first thing I did was seek a fresh salad and a milkshake, which was, of course, the first I'd had in many years. After the war, I traveled extensively, and in 1967 in Singapore, I saw tremendous sea fortifications, which had been built for approaching Japs who they expect to come by sea, but instead the Japs had come from the back over the mountains, and the fortifications there were very minor. And I met a lot of Japanese people in Japan. We talked a little about the war. And I think that's about all I have to say.
Well, what did they say? I mean, what was the general feeling of the Japanese when you talked to them about the war?
Well, a lot of them thought the government was in the wrong. A lot of them. And some of them would not talk about it.
I'd like to back up and ask you a few questions about some of your experiences. You were awarded the Purple Heart, is that correct?
Yeah.
Would you describe the circumstances of your getting wounded?
Well, that was in Bougainville. It was not a heavy wound, and I was back in service after a few weeks.
When did you know you'd won the Silver Star? That's one of the highest awards you can win in the military.
My battalion commander brought it up to the divisional commander, and they told me that I had been awarded the Silver Star.
I know your family was proud of you for that, weren't they?
Yeah, I tell you, I really didn't mention the war much when I got home.
Really?
And it's just recently that on occasions like this and having joined the World War II
Round table.
World War II round table?
World War II round table where I made a speech and we discussed sort of things. And I gave a couple of courses at Armory on World War II. And
But you went a lot of years without discussing it.
a lot of years I didn't feel like discussing anything. I was just glad to get home and
Yeah.
get to the
I can understand that.
mechanism of,
And losing his brother
Yeah.
was painful.
Yeah.
what,
Losing your brother.
It was painful.
I know the pain of losing your brother brought back a lot of tough memories
it was
too.
my only brother and I had no sisters. So it was a really very painful situation.
Yeah.
It is to this day.
I'm sure it is. Where were you and what was your reaction and your comrades' reactions when you heard that the bombs had been dropped on Japan and the war was ending?
We were in a camp in somewhere in the middle of Luzon when we heard the news. Of course, the news before that about Roosevelt's passing hit us very strongly. And then we heard that Truman had allowed to drop the bomb on Japan, and we thought, my God, I mean, this saved a lot of our lives. I mean, I might not have come home after that.
Yeah, we hear that from a lot of veterans that
Yeah.
that probably saved their lives.
Right.
You mentioned that you were in Toccoa, Georgia for training. Was that Currahee?
Huh?
Was it
Curry,
Currahee where the
mountain.
band of brothers trained?
Right,
And,
right,
uh,
right.
And you ran up that mountain and down, that was part of the
Right.
training?
Yeah. That really gave us an appetite.
Well, just briefly, tell us about your life after the Army. You got out in 1946, is that correct?
Yeah.
Good.
After I got out of the Army, we had been in the clothing business and I was interested in fashion. And the South was much behind in high fashion. And I got the idea of approaching top women's clothing designers in New York and letting them represent me in the South, which would have been a wide open territory for them. And I opened showrooms in Dallas and Miami and Atlanta and Charlotte, New York, representing these very fine designers, and I did very, very well till I finally retired in 1988. And I didn't retire till I was in my 80s, incidentally.
Well, you didn't even retire then, did you? Didn't you continue
Not
your work for
really,
them?
because my former wife, who had passed away, was a psychologist. And she was a professor at Emory and also had a big private practice. And we used to go to cocktail parties, and I met Jim Laney, who was the president of Emory at that time. And he offered me the position of taking over Emory Senior University, which after a few weeks I decided would be very interesting, and which I have done until this time.
Well, you've lived and are still living a fascinating life.
Yeah, I'll be 96 in December, and I don't know how long I'll do this, but
Would you take your hat off and show us both sides of it, please?
of the hat, yeah.
Okay.
This is a Jewish war veterans cap, and it has my combat infantryman badge, my paratroop badge, and my Silver Star emblem.
Could you turn it around so we can see the organization, the Jewish
Yeah.
war veterans? We'll just get that closer to the camera so we can see it.
112 of the Jewish war veterans.
Okay, thank you.
And I want to give you one more item to display in front of the camera and describe. And this is headline Republic of the Philippines Central Housing Committee, Manila. Would you describe what that is?
Yes. This is a document incidentally printed on the back of stationery from the office of the mayor of Manila, and it's dated in November 20th, 1944, and it says the Imperial Japanese Forces has requested the intervention of the Central Housing Committee for the occupancy for military reasons of your premises located at and a certain address. In view thereof, the committee enjoins your cooperation and requests that you vacate said premises not later than within 24 hours. In other words, this was almost an example of Japanese eminent domain.
This is the front of the document,
I don't know if we'll be able to get
and then the
it.
back of the document is the stationery of the office of the mayor, with the envelope being the office of the president of the Philippines. And one other item, you've got 2 pages, actually the front and back of one page and the front of another page of photographs, and we're going to copy these and keep a copy
You
of the
can
history.
keep that.
Okay. Is there anything in particular you'd like to describe on the video and in the transcript about any of those pictures? I
Well,
noticed you have one that's marked torpedoed.
yeah, I don't remember what ship it was, but we came across an open boat which contained, I think, 8 or 9 men from a torpedo ship, which we rescued, which was very fortunate for them, of course. Also have a picture of me with my best friend, which was a small monkey. Best friend at the time. Have pictures with Japanese prisoners. Pictures of me fishing. And different taxi stand, pottery peddlers, a market, and different. Also have a picture of the plane, which we dropped surrender leaflets from.
And that flag is the flag he has.
Yeah, I see you have one with the captured Japanese flag also.
Yeah, I have that at home.
Let me see if I can get
We'll
some.
put these in front of the camera, and then they'll be as part of your file here at the History
Okay.
Center.
Just do kind of like.
While Tony's showing these, I want to ask you one more question. After you were out of the Army and you were back home, and even during your experience in the Army, did you realize you'd been part of one of the most significant events in world history, World War II? I mean, did you realize the significance of what you were doing?
A funny thing, I came to realize this completely after it was all over. I mean, during the entire process, I was just taken up by the excitement and the antagonism and the pathos and everything that went along
Yeah.
with war.
Just trying to survive, I guess.
Right.
You know, I'm going to give Ms. Lavine a chance to say anything or ask any questions, and Tony also if he has any questions, but I do want to thank you for your service. I mean, you're obviously getting a Silver Star, you're a real hero, but everybody that participated is a hero, but you
Right.
you were right in the
There
heat of battle. And
there were an
you're,
awful lot of unsung heroes.
Yeah. well, you're a hero to us, and we really appreciate your service. I can't describe how much it means
It
to
was worthwhile.
us. Mr. Lavine, do you have anything you want to say? Tony?
No, you did well.
I just remember one other little item, I don't know what is pertinent, but
Everything's pertinent.
it used to reach 130 degrees sometimes out there in the different islands. And I remember we would have lunch, and it was so hot, we were perspiring so much, we used to have to take our towels and mop ourselves up and lay down and try to do away with the heat, do away with the hot feeling. I don't know whether anybody else has mentioned this, but everybody used to carry 2 canteens. One canteen was for drinking water, and one canteen was for washing. And by washing, it meant we used a helmet, and we washed our face and hands, then we washed our underwear, our towel, and our socks, all in that one canteen of water.
It's amazing what you can do when you have to do it, isn't it?
Right.
Well, is there anything else you would like to tell us about your military history or
That's
your
about
life?
all I can think of at the moment.
Well, this has been fascinating, and again, thank you for your service, and thank you for taking the time to come down here and share your
Well,
experiences.
Pleasure, and thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.